Hello and welcome to episode 35 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. Welcome to an entertaining discussion of the week's developments in clean energy and transportation. This week, Brian, there's all kinds of things going on again, isn't there?
There's too much. I'm overwhelmed. We should maybe just not bother. There's too much.
We're going to have to hire more people. We're going to need a staff. We're going to need a headquarters, perhaps a skyscraper somewhere with solar panels on it. There's all kinds of things. There's late-breaking things. There's Tesla's earnings call is coming out in just a couple of hours from when we're recording this, or 1 hour and a half, and that's Wednesday afternoon. And they've released a full self-driving beta to a handful of people. And, of course, they had to sign a non-disclosure agreement for that. But as you would normally happen, we'd see more people leak out, right?
Yeah, I was sort of wondering if we'd get any leaks on this, but probably not.
Yeah, I've been refreshing the electric page. Even as we speak, I have it up and running. So if there's any last-second information. This is huge. I just read a hit piece in the Washington Post on Tesla self-driving, and it was mostly negative. It was mostly most people say they can't do it without LiDAR. Even iPhones have LiDAR now. What do you make of that?
So this is a brand new article that just came out?
Brand new article, yeah. It was discussing the latest thing and how they shouldn't be doing it. All the competition says they shouldn't be doing it. They're not ready, and they don't have, regular drivers.
Well, there's definitely a question there, and I I'd never watched the full autonomy presentation, and we got lots of stuff to talk about here. I want to talk about nuclear fusion, and I want to talk about AM radio, but there is lots of Tesla news. But yeah, I just watched for the first time the full Autonomy Day presentation, which was from about a year ago. I had seen clips, but I hadn't watched the whole thing, and it was very much like Battery Day, where it was like they really laid out the roadmap, but it was maybe too complex for a lot of people to understand. But, the roadmap is laid out, and they were saying they'd be releasing a version of it about a year from now, and the presentation was about a year ago. So they're close to not quite meeting the targets that he was saying in the presentation, but it's all coming.
Well, basically right now, it will stop at a stop sign or a stop light, right? If you have full self-driving in the city at low speeds, you have to sort of acknowledge the green light manually. Is that correct?
Yes, although now I believe it goes through green lights without having to acknowledge currently.
So the latest beta just gets rid of the stopping part and just goes through everything and takes care of everything slowly. Yeah. He said, right? He said it'll be going slow.
But it's a complete rewrite. It'll be running on a completely different set of code. This is the new foundational rewrite that they started from the ground up. So it will have similarities to the old one, and it will hopefully pick up where the old one left off. But it's a whole new build, and I'm just dying to see a YouTube video leak out somewhere.
We all are. This is a big deal because this is the future of the planet here, because as soon as robotaxis come and as soon as that breakthrough happens, it's a downhill decline for fossil fuels, for one thing. And because the idea is that robotaxis, there'll be large fleets of them. They'll have to power them by solar because they'll have to be electric in order to be cheaper than the competition. If you don't go that way, then you're going to get annihilated. And that's why automation is good for the planet. And we are anxiously awaiting. And no one really knows. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, what's your bet? If you had to bet today, what would you bet on the date that a robotaxi comes to, say, Los Angeles and is widely, Uber is buying and doing everything? What would you say? What for a date? I mean, it varies widely between now and never. So that's a big range.
And first of all, I'll mention, too, something I learned from watching the autonomy presentation is you won't be able to, it sounds like you won't be allowed to use it on an Uber network. If you're going to use it as a robotaxi, it'll have to be on the Tesla network, like they have something in their agreements when you buy the car. You have to run it. So they could still run Teslas on the Uber network, and they probably do now with a human driver. But it sounds like that will not be allowed with the autonomy. But he said lots of things in the presentation about how LiDAR is a fool's errand and LiDAR will not work. And so, but you're telling me there's still proponents on the other side who think
yes.
that
They
LiDAR is the way to go.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, so it remains to be seen, but it was a pretty compelling case after I watched the whole 2-hour plus presentation.
Of course, there's billions of dollars at play here, including your riches and Tesla stock.
Yeah.
If it went well, you'd be an even wealthier man and could hire a robot to replace you for the podcast, which will be nice and, something different. Hopefully, I don't know, somebody with sparkling personality and wit that can match yours, but an AI intelligence nonetheless. Yeah, so I just, whoever gets there first, it's a big deal. And Waymo just started to do Phoenix without a driver. We mentioned that last week. Chevrolet's, what are they called? Cruise? Chevy Cruise, fully self-driving vehicles have started in the tricky city of San Francisco, supposedly. So there's a race on here, and maybe Elon didn't want to go ahead with the beta right now. Maybe that got pushed ahead a bit, but there seems to be a they were sort of being very casual with this for a long time, and all of a sudden there's a sprint to the finish line. So we'll see.
I think there'll be a long period where the car will be self-driving, but there'll be a human backup. And for Tesla, they'll need to do that for a certain amount just to get the data, because, the more cars they can have doing this, the more data they can collect. And, they have data on, like, every time the driver intervenes, they have a recording of that, a record of that. So, once they can get a few thousand of these cars on the road collecting data, they'll be able to see, at this corner, the driver had to take over. At this stoplight, the driver had to take over. And it's an exponential growth in the software. Like it's AI machine learning is all kind of exponential. So it's just going to accelerate from here. Yeah.
And, what they're saying is that the camera can't detect a box truck from they had an example of it detecting poop as pylons at a cow pasture, and
this is in the article you read?
Yeah, it was in the Washington Post, and it's just, I feel for Tesla because they get so much unwarranted negative press from people who just don't understand what's going on. The fact is, he's saying the cameras will basically be human. They'll be artificial intelligence. They'll be able to detect things, and they'll put together a 3D view that LiDAR can't. And they do have some radar on, right? They have a certain kind of radar that is measuring the distance between objects, but not telling them the shape of the object necessarily.
And the question I always had was winter, right? Because we live in a frozen hellscape for half of the year. And that's always the first thing that I think of, and probably you think of, is like, well, this is ridiculous. How is this going to work in the snow? And it's very much answered in the presentation. And the idea is that if a human can see it and drive it, then a computer can see it and drive it. And there's really no reason why that formula would be any different. And as time goes on, they rely less and less on things like lane markings, because, of course, the lane markings, particularly around here, are terrible. They don't really rely on GPS or maps. It's all vision, and that's going to be the key. If a human can see it and drive it, then a computer can see it and drive it, and there's really no reason to doubt that.
Yeah, and they're saying, the article's saying, well, it's not going to work at night, it's not going to work in fog, and these are the conditions. But if a human can do it, the cameras are actually better than my eyes. You know that?
Yeah, that happens all the time, especially modern digital cameras that they can see in the dark. It's crazy.
Yeah, they can see in starlight, for God's sake. I mean, it's crazy what they can do now. Anyway, Brian, I wanted to mention that we are now in India. Isn't that something?
Oh, that's fantastic.
Because India, and I'm going to say hello to our Indian listeners. Hello, everybody in India. I hope it's nice there. Looking forward to the next monsoon season in late spring, our time. India is the largest country in South Asia. Brian, did you know that?
I'm sure. Yes, I knew that.
Did you really know that? I mean, come on. Of course you knew that. We all know that. There's your ding.
Thank you.
The word Indian comes from Sindhu, a local name for the Indus River. India has a population of 940 million people. I think if we can get half of those people listening to our show, that's pretty good. We'll have a pretty big show if we can get half of them listening. So everyone in India, tell your friends, this is the Clean Energy Show, and we are here for you. Oh, by the way, Brian, we can't swear anymore. Oh. It's a major detail. We could get banned in India for swearing. So let's just
damn
be
it.
careful.
I mean, darn it.
Golly. Just have to bleep them out from now on.
So what has changed? There's a particular server that we had to be on to be in India?
Well, podcasts are largely listened to on Ghana, which is a sort of the Spotify of India. So it's a server, sort of a music service that has an area of podcasts, and podcasts are big. They're about even 8% of North American audiences are coming from India these days. So this is fairly new that they've been allowing that on. So it's expanding rapidly. Anytime something expands, I mean, if we can make it in China, I'm all for it. We may never be able to travel there again without getting arrested, but we can change the system from without. Anyway, hello, India, and we'll try and have some India news for you on a regular basis because there's a lot going on in India. We've already been talking about it in the last few episodes, so if you're new to the show, check out our last few episodes. We've been talking about India, especially as a political example of not going to EVs, but I've checked out the EV news in India, and guess what? They are still pushing forward with EV mandates, and that's on the horizon. So what do you have for us this week beyond the full self-driving? I mean, the GMC Hummer came out last night. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, it looks okay, but it's very expensive. It's going to be available in very limited quantities for, a very long time. It's the thing we always complain about. It seems like a decent vehicle, but it's a little too late. It'll be years, it seems, before it's in any kind of serious volume production.
You know what I'd like to see? It's an impressive vehicle, by the way. It's $120,000, the most expensive early version of it. And the cheapest Tesla Cybertruck, I think, is $60. So it's like twice. Yeah. The most pimped up version is twice as much as the Cybertruck. But it is kind of a cool vehicle. I mean, you can take the top. I mean, you'd have to be independently wealthy to have it as a toy. And those are the people who are going to buy it. Maybe a few businesses will buy it just to get attention. There's a guy down my street who I vastly dislike who has 2 gas Humvees or diesel or whatever they are, Hummers in his driveway with the name of his bar on it. And he's got a giant political sign for a right-wing party, like so giant that you think that maybe that he's very close to that party. So questioning whether the party has any green credentials at all. So what I'd like to see, though, is I'd like to see them sell one to every market, because that would be really good advertising for EVs. I mean, because people, rednecks and otherwise, would be like, whoa. And if you're like us and you're appalled by such sights, you'd be like, wait, that's green. It's an EV. But man, sell one to every market and have it as an advertisement for not only for EVs, but for the company, which is going to go downhill pretty soon if they don't watch it.
Yeah, it's a potential halo car for GM. It's too expensive for most people, but ultimately probably pretty cool.
So what have you got for us this week, Brian Stockton?
I want to talk about the cutting edge of technology, which is nuclear fusion and AM radio.
You lost me at AM radio, and I was barely hanging on with nuclear fusion.
Well, I've been driving around listening to AM radio, and it's because, so I don't know if you know this, but the Tesla cars don't come with an AM radio tuner. They only come with an FM tuner.
Right. So you have to stream it?
And so my premium connectivity on my Tesla got restored. So I now have lifetime cellular data for free from Tesla.
Lifetime.
And so
how do you know? How do you know it's lifetime? I don't understand. How do you know it's lifetime?
Well, you go into the menu on the thing, and it just says included package, premium connectivity included package. And
so was that a glitch? I mean, what's the internet saying about this? Why is that happening?
Well, apparently there was a lawsuit brewing in Quebec that Tesla didn't do very good communication around this. So at one time when you bought a Tesla, premium connectivity was just simply included. Everybody who bought the car got premium connectivity for the life of the car. And at some point they switched, and you would get just a 3-month trial, and then after that you'd have to pay 15 Canadian dollars a month. But Tesla's not always great at communication. And so they kind of botched the transition from getting it free to having to pay for it. So a bunch of the people that bought the car around the same time that I did started complaining, and there was a potential lawsuit brewing in Quebec over, sort of false promises, false advertising. So they seem to have done it as a preemptive measure to sort of, cut off this potential lawsuit. But it's just fun driving around listening to AM radio, which I never do. But because I have the premium connectivity, you can get AM stations through the TuneIn app on the car. And it's fun because it actually sounds way better than AM radio. AM radio sounds terrible. It's surprising it even still exists. Like the sound quality is just horrendous.
It is surprising.
But if you've got the cellular connection, you can drive around listening to all your favorite AM stations at super high quality.
Used to be on AM radio when I was a lad. Well, an old lad.
I did. I got my start as an AM radio announcer.
Yeah. Well, I was probably in high school. You were a household name. Brian, as you are now for the Clean Energy Show, just in a different way. With all the sex scandals and such and, things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious what you have to say about nuclear fusion. I can't say it. That's twice now. Nuclear fusion.
Yeah, so Green Tech Media has a story that just came out. MIT validates the science behind new nuclear fusion reactor design. So nuclear fusion is sort of the opposite of nuclear fission. Instead of blowing things up nuclearly, you can, you get free energy out of nuclear atoms. I don't know how it works, but there is a potential to generate huge amounts of power if they can solve this, and it sounds like they're kind of one step closer. They're going to have a sort of they're building a pilot project, which is maybe 25 megawatts, something like that, and they think that they can eventually get that higher. I think it's like that a machine in Spider-Man 2 that turns Dr. Octopus into a supervillain. It's something like that.
Something like that, very similar to that. I'm skeptical. Are you not skeptical about the whole price thing?
Oh, yeah, I'm skeptical, too. That's the real issue behind it is when you can get solar panels for as cheap as you can get them and batteries getting cheaper and cheaper, it probably doesn't make sense to go down this path because there's so much money it's going to cost to build these things and validate them and keep them from blowing up and turning people into supervillains. But nevertheless, I'm fascinated by the science of it, and be kind of amazing if they got it to work.
Well, maybe there's room for it in certain situations in certain parts of the world. I mean, it'd be better if we didn't because of the waste problem. Waste is an issue, and it never goes away, and it's dangerous and not pleasant. But if it is a base load power, and our provincial government, as well as two others, for a total of 3 in Canada, 3 different provinces are getting behind this now, even though it doesn't exist yet. Solar and wind exist. Battery storage exists. Nuclear fusion, not so much. Not yet. Who knows when it's going to be? I mean, it could take 10 years to come to maturity. It could take another 10 before you get idea to plant off the ground for environmental approval and all that. And by then, Brian, it's 2040. Our podcast would have been over for 10 years because we're only going to 2030. And, I'll be able to have a solar panel on my hat that powers my whole house. Like there's advances in solar panels coming still. Those take a while to mature. All right, so I wanted to talk about, we were talking a lot about Battery Day in the last month for Tesla Battery Day, but Jeffrey Dawn he gave a presentation. Every year he gives a presentation, a short one, somewhere or another, and everyone pays very close attention to what he says. He is contracted for Tesla at Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And he was talking about batteries. This is basically, he was saying this Coke can, getting any money from Coke, unfortunately. But this tiny Coke can, it's not a normal Coke can. It's a smaller Coke can. If you compare it to the size of my skull, that's about the size of these new batteries, he said, these smaller pop cans that are out now. How many milliliters are in this? 220 milliliters. Don't ask me how many ounces that is. 90 calories. There you go. So that's the size of these new cells, and they're fat and they're big and they're energy dense and energy powerful. So everyone was looking for clues into what he was saying. And last year he made big headlines and a big stink by saying that Tesla probably has our lithium-ion batteries are going to be lasting 1 million miles. And he was taken aback by all that attention. And this year, he says, guess what? It's 2 million miles.
2 million miles.
3.5 million kilometers, which is a lot longer than any body of any car will ever last in the world, whether it's used 24 hours a day or, it's the equivalent of 41 years of daily driving. So he was... he has these graphs, and they charge and discharge batteries at different rates, and he says you don't want to do that with the current EV batteries that are out there in a lot of cars, but there are differences between the battery chemistry. Some are good and some are bad. He's working on the good ones, obviously, with Tesla, and he's not even fully, I don't think, versed in everything that Tesla does. But the point is, he said that when they charged and discharged, to 25%, and then recharged all the way back up full every day, that it would have no degradation whatsoever. Now, a typical use for that would be if you have a 400-kilometer car, right, with a range of 400 kilometers. So let's say you had a job across town in a bigger city, and you ended up using a quarter of that to go to and from work every day. If you did that and charged it up every day, there would be no degradation over 41 years based on the chemistry that they're testing right now. There's not theoretical. They're testing them in the lab. They have them there. They're done. They're just testing on how well they perform. And the ones that go to 100% charge and down to 0% charge, which is supposed to kill a battery, actually, it looked like maybe 12% degradation over decades. So what this means, Brian Stockton, you're probably asking, James, what does this mean?
What does this mean?
It means batteries that they put into grid storage will last 25 years. So if you do a grid storage project for a town, for a reservation, for a business, for the energy grid, the electricity grid, you don't have to worry about that. In fact, it's so cheap that he's saying, don't sell it to somebody, lease it to them. Lease it to them for a small amount of money, because you're going to make that money back after 10 years, and everything after 10 years is gravy for 15 years. It's a terrific investment. He's saying they're so cheap, don't sell them. Lease them. That's how cheap they are.
And eventually, of course, as these things get more energy dense and cheaper, then you can design all of your systems, if you want to, storage or cars, so that you only ever need 25% of the battery. I mean, that's kind of about what I use right now, typically, 25% of the battery in a day. But if it's a robo-taxi, just put in a bigger battery and charge it up.
I don't know what the economics are that, but they would figure that out and see what the sweet spot is. And it's fantastic. And people worry about how long will my EV battery last. Well, it's done. It's over. That question is no longer valid in any way, shape, or form. It's
still valid probably for cars being sold now. I mean, I've already lost a few kilometers of range on my car, so it is valid for cars being sold now, but obviously improving quickly.
Yeah, and it's good news for the grid. It's good news for energy. People say Elon was even against sort of vehicle to grid charging, where you could make money selling electricity to the grid from your car that's plugged in and sitting there when the grid needs it in order to save the grid operator money. Well, if you do this, it's not going to be a big deal. You could say, well, do 25%. That's how much I'll give you, and that's how much I'm making. You'll have range. You'll have a battery that doesn't degrade, or you can set whatever you'd like.
Yeah, and Musk is probably thinking of a day, too, where most of his Teslas are driving around continuously on the robo-taxi network. So they're not going to have time to plug into the grid and feed the grid. So I think that's the other reason he's not as big on it is, he knows his cars are going to be driving all the time.
Somebody asked him about fuel cells, and he started in fuel cells about 20 years ago. He was working with fuel cells and lithium batteries, and I have a clip here of what he thinks about fuel cells.
You have to produce hydrogen by electrolyzing water, which is fine, but it's only about 70 to 80% efficient. And then the hydrogen has to be stored somehow, and on a vehicle that's stored in a compressed tank. And compressing the hydrogen is about 80 to 90% efficient. And then the fuel cell itself, when it's operating, is about 50 to 60% efficient. So when you multiply all these efficiencies together, you get about 35 to 40% efficient.
I don't understand people who are big on fuel cells in cars. It seems like a bloody joke. I mean, it costs you $100 to fill up. There's not very many stations. It's a lot easier to, and it's not green. Right now it's not green. Theoretically, it could be green. It's not green now. They're using natural gas. I don't get it, Brian. The Toyota has Mirais going around, and the government talks about supporting it. Now, there's probable uses in shipping and maybe airplanes one day, but it seems ridiculous to me that anyone would even go there.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like a bit of a dead end for cars, especially since we've made so much progress in EVs so quickly. But potential uses, like you say, shipping, planes, why not?
Or even, battery. You remember how California's had excess solar and wind on certain days? He said, well, if you have days like that and you have a hydrogen plant making hydrogen and you need to use excess energy to just waste off, that would be a good way to waste it off and just make hydrogen under those circumstances. But as an efficiency, the best efficiency it is 50% of the best case scenario. The dream scenario is like 50% of what the efficiency of a battery electric car is. So in other words, you would need 4 times as many solar panels. If you did go green and you did make the hydrogen with solar, you would need 4 times the solar farms to make one. Somebody asked him, what do you wish that the general population knew about battery storage that they don't know? Here's his answer.
I wish they all knew what a kilowatt hour was. Because many have no idea what a kilowatt hour is. They get their electricity bill, they say, it's $120, but they don't realize they're being billed by the amount of energy that they use. And they don't appreciate, a kilowatt hour, a megawatt hour, a gigawatt hour.
Yeah, so a kilowatt hour is 1,000 watts for an hour. So if you had a 1,000-watt hairdryer and you plugged it in for an hour, it would use 1 kilowatt hour. Used to have 100-watt light bulbs. We don't anymore. But, how would you explain it?
Yeah, no, that's exactly how I would explain it. But he's totally correct. It is a slightly confusing concept. So I know what it is. You know what it is. But, yeah, the vast majority of people. And of course, when you're talking about this stuff, you often talk about kilowatts. So, my car in the driveway here can charge at 7 kilowatts. So you're always talking about kilowatts as well as kilowatt hours. And, I can understand why it's confusing for people.